Hello and welcome back to Particular Pixels. I'm Xiaoling and this is my review of Dwarf Fortress Premium. So Dwarf Fortress has been around since 2006 and I've actually been wanting to try it for many years, but the ASCII visuals combined with the complexity of the game was somewhat of a deterrent. Although I did consider using a skin pack, I never actually got around to playing it, unfortunately. But to my surprise, a Steam Premium version was released recently with mouse control, a UI and a complete visual overhaul. So this seemed like a perfect opportunity for me to finally try out the game. I've spent around 93 hours with the game so far and still consider myself a beginner by all standards, but here are my impressions. Dwarf Fortress is at its core a colony management simulator, but unlike many other similar games it has inspired over the years, it also simulates the entire outside world and its events, some of which will affect your fortress and others which do not. You may come across one of the heroes, artifacts, or even the titans, or perhaps one of your dwarves will be the one crafting a legendary artifact in your playthrough that others will try and take. There are endless possibilities for all kinds of emergent stories and events with the way the game generates things. It's great. Outside of this, it plays very much like you would expect a colony management simulator to play. You have a population that you need to feed and keep happy, you mine resources, build up your base, explore, and try to survive and hopefully prosper for as long as you can, all while dealing with the numerous curveballs the game throws at you. Dwarf Fortress's visuals are just a simple representation of what is actually happening, arguably more so than some other games of this genre, and don't reflect most of the details that are actually going on under the hood. Nothing in this game is animated per se, so units and enemies are just static sprites that move around the play area, and this is something to keep in mind. All of its depth and juicy information is found in the combat logs, various other descriptors of characters, items and other stuff, and will require that you take the time to read them. If you're expecting heavy hitting animations, sound effects or a visual representation of combat, you won't find that here. However, I think that having most of the details represented by the text offers the ability for it to tell so much more of a story and give much deeper descriptions of events and items than any visual representation could or even be feasible to do. This of course may not be a plus to everyone, especially those who don't like reading lots of text. When you start a new game, 100 years of history are generated before the game starts. Before you actually start playing, you can use something called Legends mode to see what has transpired during the time. So historical figures, sites, artifacts, coded scrolls, regions, underground regions, civilizations, art, structures and chronicles are all in the list. And as you can see from the video, there's a ton of information here if it's something you want to read, all with colored links to cross-reference events and all that type of thing. Unfortunately though, you can't enter this mode once you've actually started your fortress, which is a bit of a disappointment. There are workarounds, but it would be nice to be able to access this while in the game so you can read up on a titan that has come into your game, for example. After the world is generated, you get to choose an embark location and are able to set up a bunch of filters on what areas are preferable for your playthrough. Different climates, wilderness types, along with a variety of other factors will influence how easy or hard of a time you're going to have in your playthrough. As with similar games, it's also possible to set up a custom embark where you choose the equipment and the dwarves you're going to start out with. At the start of the game, you'll have 7 dwarves, a wagon full of goods and materials, and some livestock and hopefully a game plan. There is a very basic tutorial included in the game as well that explains some of the systems, but unfortunately it doesn't cover nearly enough. At this point you'll start construction of your fortress, mining out the deep to make spaces for rooms and other parts of your fortress, assigning everyone tasks suited to their skill sets, planting both your underground and overland farms, creating breweries for food and drink supplies, building a tavern, carpenters' workshops, various metalsmith related workshops, jewelers and some other workshops, along with various stockpiles for storage of all your goods, so that you can more efficiently grow and maintain your economy, in addition to constructing walls and gates and other defenses to protect your fort from dangers, of course. At the start you'll have to manually assign tasks at each of your workshops and only have an estimate as to how many supplies you have. But not too far into the game you'll get to make an office for both a manager and a bookkeeper, allowing you to track your resources more accurately, along with the ability to assign work orders at a much larger scale without the need to micromanage each of your workshops. There are a number of noble and administrative positions that unlock as the game progresses, each with its own requirements that need to be met in order for them to function. When your population reaches a certain size, a mayor will be elected. You'll need a captain of the guard and a dungeon keeper to enact punishment for crimes, militia captains for each squad you intend to have, a chief medical dwarf if you want a hospital, a broker to get the best prices with trade caravans. You will eventually need to train up a more substantial army as well to defend your fortress from goblin invaders and the myriad of other dangers that lurk on the surface and in the deepest parts of the earth. Soldiers need gear, so you'll need to craft these items in your workshops and use your best armorers and weaponsmiths to do so if you want higher quality gear that offers better bonuses. You can create several squads as well and assign each squad with a general or very specific gear, set up training schedules, patrol routes and the like. Needless to say, soldiers can also get injured and killed, so having a hospital with skilled doctors in various disciplines is necessary, along with keeping your hospital supplied with splints, bandages and soap to clean wounds, and making sure it has enough beds and a traction bench. You'll also need to keep your dwarves happy. Every dwarf has a personality, wants, needs, memories. Good events are going to add to their mood, whereas events that they don't like are going to reduce it. Some events will remain in their memories and affect the rest of their lives as well. There's a lot of detail here if you choose to dig into it. Improving rooms with fancy items, engravings and such, adding entertainment at the tavern or temples to whichever deities they worship, assigning them jobs that they like, establishing guilds for groups that request them, and having them spend time with friends and family will improve their mood. There's a fair amount to keep track of here, as with everything else in the game, as I said earlier, but the happier your dwarves are, needless to say, the fewer issues you are going to have. Unhappy dwarves will start causing trouble, breaking things, starting fights, and in general being a nuisance, which affects those around them, or even refuse to eat and drink. Now, regardless of how well you manage things, inevitably there are always going to be some discontented citizens. You'll need to build a dungeon, appoint a dungeon master and a captain of the guard to deal with these troublesome elements. This allows you to interview the witnesses of each crime and eventually convict these dwarves and send them to the dungeon for a time. It's an interesting system that seems to have a lot of depth. Now, while this is all happening, you'll be expanding your fortress and mining deeper and deeper in search of valuable ore to make jewelry or items to sell and increase your renown, and metal ores to improve your weapons and armor for tougher enemies, of which there are plenty. Digging deep enough will eventually uncover caverns that contain all kinds of valuable resources, but also a number of dangerous enemies. These locations are better locations to have your underground farms in than the mud/sand/clay layers, but they do come with their own risks. Digging even deeper will uncover magma and a host of other dangers as well. As the distance increases for all your mining, you'll be able to build a minecart network system to transport goods more efficiently as well, which can also eventually be powered, which is pretty cool. The population soft caps at around 200 dwarves by default, up to 220 I believe, with kids. This amount can be increased or lowered in your options screen to your preference, but keep in mind increasing it could have an impact on your frame rate. The game can be paused at any time, otherwise its speed is connected to your frame rate. You can decrease and increase your frame rate to affect the game speed with hotkeys, but there is no way to jump to a particular preset speed, which is a pity. A few simple presets would certainly be a welcome addition as opposed to the system that is currently in place. Combat wise, not much is visually shown, as I alluded to earlier, some blood splatters or corpses, but it is quite descriptive textually, and if you really want to delve into the details, you need to check the text log of events and the character info to see how a unit is doing and what injuries they've received. As with everything else in the game, the depth is in the text. None of this detracts at all from the experience, at least for me. I quite liked it, but certainly it may not be to the liking of some players. There's a world map as well where you get some information about what's happening around you, send your squads on raids, rescue missions, missions to get artifacts and such. You don't get to see these events, but you can read about their failure or success from this window, along with other information like what trade agreements you currently have, news and rumors, amongst other things. Dwarf Fortress is all about stories, and you'll find plenty of them all over the internet, some really crazy stories for sure. These emergent stories come about because of the way stuff is generated and plays out in the world you create. In my main game, my dungeon master of all people got convicted for causing trouble, and just a few months after he was appointed to the position. Perhaps I chose poorly. At any rate, after he'd been convicted, he was being led to his cell and he killed himself. Well, at least I think that's what happened, unless someone murdered him, but I can't quite be sure. At some point, a Swamp Titan decided to wander into my zone. It was certainly a tough fight. I lost an entire fully armored squad, and this thing's AoE fire attacks decimated the entire woodland, causing wood shortage for months. But despite these setbacks, my fortress became quite successful. My civilization decided to make my fortress its capital after about 8 years in game, and then the king moved into my fortress, demanding the fanciest room I'd ever made. gold, jewel encrusted furniture, a large room, gold statues and the like. And then of course the king started to make mandates on what I could and couldn't craft. There are unfortunately a number of issues with the game. The first and most serious are the crashes that plagued my main playthrough. These would happen randomly every season or two, causing me to lose all the progress up until that point. While this can be remedied by manually saving the game frequently, one doesn't always remember to do this when deeply invested in running the fortress. The game does autosave every 3 months at the most frequent setting, and there is no way to quick save or set the frequency of autosaves to a weekly or monthly basis, which is unfortunate. Also, saving takes a while, so it can be quite interruptive, but not as interruptive as losing 3 months of progress, I suppose. I do hope they add more options for the autosave frequency though. The second biggest issue is the UI. Now, while it's nice that the game has a UI at all, it's incredibly cumbersome and a chore to get through. It's impossible to easily go back and forth between various menus when checking on your dwarves, for example. No cut links similar to the Legends mode, which is odd. You need to exit the entire menu, open the dwarf menu again, and look through the list and scroll down to the next dwarf you want to check every single time for every single dwarf. Another example is when scheduling witness interviews. You click on the Law tab, you see a list of interviews that need to be scheduled. You'll click on one of them, you then present it with a confirmation button. Once that's done, you're taken back to the main list right at the top. So you'll need to scroll down to the next one and so on and so forth through the entire list until you've selected all of them. And when your fortress is max population, there are going to be a lot of people in this list. And again, this is very tiresome. You are going to need to do this not only for that offense you're currently doing, but every single offense that shows up in this list. There's no way to schedule all the interviews with one button click, and I'm not sure why. The entire UI suffers from these types of issues, which is a problem. I really hope this does get improved, because as it stands at the moment, navigating the UI and getting things done efficiently is far more cumbersome than it really needs to be. Finally, there are some bugs. In one of my games, dwarves just did not move corpses in the base at all, despite having the relevant stockpiles, and these items were not locked. And even after being instructed to move them specifically, nothing was done. So miasma started spreading around my base, making my residents pretty unhappy. Dwarves not being able to wear foot armor because they won't put it on over their socks by default, unless you create a specific template to do so. Issues with archers not using ammo, and stockpiles in some cases just not seeming to function the way they should, despite being set to accept only specific items or have workshops only take from or deliver specific items to them. Look, I will admit though that some of the issues I experienced were due to the game not explaining how some of these systems worked and me being completely new. In one of my games, my dwarves had no option to make high boots of any kind, despite me being able to do it in every single other game that I started. It took me asking on the forums, since I thought it was a bug, to find out that occasionally there are certain items your civilization just will not be able to craft. Of course, the game does not inform you of this in any shape or form. The tutorial is also incredibly bare bones as well, and even when combined with the informational tooltips that are currently in the game, it fails to really prepare you for the depth of this game. If you want to get the most out of Dwarf Fortress, you are going to need to read the wiki, read some guides, watch some video tutorials from more proficient players if you hope to understand some of the more convoluted, poorly explained systems. These onboarding features, I think, need a lot of improvement for new players to have an easier time learning the game. Now, I understand that due to the depth of the game, covering everything would not be possible, but players shouldn't have to rely on outside sources to learn 80% of the game's systems. Of course, while these issues don't make the game unplayable, the crashes and bugs in particular can hinder the enjoyment of the experience. There is a great post on the Steam forums regarding some improvements that could be made. I'm not going to go into them here since it's quite a long list, but you can read them yourself. I've put a link in the description box below. I have to stress that it was impossible for me to cover all the systems in the game since there are so many of them, and it would turn this review into a video essay. But as a new player, I still have a lot to learn, and I most certainly am only scratching the surface. What I can say is that Dwarf Fortress is a fantastic game if you have the patience to learn it. No doubt a labor of love. I'm very happy that the Adams brothers decided to release a more accessible version of the game that would give players like me a chance to play it. However, as I said earlier, the UI needs a serious overhaul in almost every aspect, and the tutorial, along with the way the game presents information, also needs some work. Especially when comparing these areas to something like Rimworld, for example. It highlights how incredibly inferior this UI is as far as accessibility and ease of use go. As I said, this doesn't make Dwarf Fortress bad, just frustrating to navigate, and this could put some players off. Now, regardless of these issues, I loved my time with the game and was itching to play more, but the constant crashes were enough for me to stop playing until they sorted out. As a colony management game, this is one of the best out there, no doubt, with regards to its depth, world generation, and ability to create crazy immersion stories. I don't think that the asking price of €30 is too much for what you're getting, but the game does need some improvement, and not 10 years down the line. And I do hope that with the success of the Steam sales, they'll be able to release more frequent updates, more content, and fixes down the line. Anyway, that's been my impressions of Dwarf Fortress. I hope some of you found this helpful. If you do have any questions, you can leave them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. I've been Charling, and I'll see you next time.